The following are allegedly true accounts from users on 2channel. I would like to give special thanks to Tara A. Devlin, who translated all of these posts and stories for all of us to enjoy. I will leave a link to her website where you can check out more of her translations, as well as her books that catalog stories like these, and some stories that she's even written herself. Be sure to support her because I know this isn't easy work, and you gotta show appreciation for these kinds of things, especially those that keep at it. Alrighty then, let's begin. This is a story my grandfather told me. I'll do my best to remember and write it down. His name was Shinji, so I call him Shinji. One day Shinji told me a strange story. This was the only time he had ever told me such a story before he died several years ago. When Shinji was around 6 or 7 years old, he had a brother who was 2 years older that died from sickness. His brother was terribly sick and didn't have much time left, so my great-grandfather, Shinji's father, said that he should spend his remaining time at home, and they cared for him there. Shinji played with his older brother in his room until he was unable to. Then, as his brother was getting close to passing, his father asked him to stop. Then one night, his brother died. It was summer, and of course they had no air conditioning. Not wanting to damage the body, his father decided to take him to the nearest place to do the funeral rites. Shinji's house was way out in the countryside, a place where there wasn't even any roads a car could pass through, so their father decided to piggyback him there. And because there was no light on the road, Shinji held a torch and they went together. While shining the torch in front of them, Shinji walked alongside his father, who was carrying his brother's dead body. It was a quiet country road during the middle of the night, so they didn't see any people. All they could hear were the sounds of bugs crying and their own feet on the gravel. The pair walked in silence. My grandfather said his father's face looked extremely tired. After they walked for a while, they saw the figure of a person in front of them. It seemed like the person was walking in the same direction as them, but was moving slowly. They didn't think too much about it and thought they would catch up to the figure in no time. But as Shinji casually cast his torch over the person's back, his breath caught in his throat. He'd seen that outfit somewhere before. He quickly remembered where. It was the same outfit that his brother was wearing on their father's back right now. His father noticed at the same time and whispered to him sharply, "Shinji, don't shine that." He quickly lowered the torch and shone it on their own feet. Because the figure was walking slower than them, they slowly began to close the distance. Shinji started to get scared and wanted to stop walking, but he noticed that whenever he did, the figure in front of them stopped walking too. His father had probably realized the same thing. Slowly they got close to the figure. The person was just as tall as his brother. Before long he saw the figure's feet. He was barefoot, even though the road wasn't paved. There were no marks or injuries on his feet. They got even closer. He could see shorts. He knew those pants. They were green and had cuffs. He also saw the shirt, a blue and white striped shirt, his brother's favorite. He saw the back of his head. At that moment his father grabbed his shoulder and said, "Don't look! Shinji, don't look!" Shinji was slightly curious about it, but cast his eyes down. His father was muttering something. He couldn't hear very well, but it sounded like a prayer. They finally closed the distance, and Shinji and his father walked side by side with it. His father was praying next to him. Shinji kept repeating to himself not to look, but as soon as they stood side by side, he realized that it was looking at him. He said that the power behind his gaze was amazingly strong. Finally, the two of them passed it, but Shinji said that was when it got really scary. When they passed it, that is to say, it was now behind them, that's when it happened. They couldn't hear footsteps, but it was definitely behind them. It was right there, behind them, and he could feel it looking right at them. My great-grandfather said, "Don't look back, Shinji. Whatever you do, don't look back." Shinji couldn't even look at his father beside him, let alone look back. The reason for that was what his father was carrying on his back. The two of them kept on walking down the country road with something following behind them. He just looked straight ahead and prayed they'd reach a place full of people soon. He didn't know when the figure behind them might call out his name or suddenly jump on him, so with his heart racing, he kept on walking. But in the end, the figure didn't call out his name or rush to attack him. The two of them arrived safely at their destination, delivered his brother's body to the morgue, and returned home. Shinji said there was nothing on the road on their way home. When I asked if it really was his brother, he acted like he didn't know. He only said this: "Ever since then, I can't get rid of the feeling that something's following me." Shinji said when that happens, he makes sure not to look back. This story happened about 30 years ago. At the time, I was a junior high school student. I lived in a small countryside village in Hokkaido where bears often roamed. It was just before the summer holidays, and I decided to spend the night studying for my end-of-term tests. I was starting to feel drowsy, however, so I grabbed the dog to go for a walk and headed for the park next to a nearby shrine. In the darkness of the park, an old man walking his tiny dog showed up. He was someone I often saw while walking on my own. That night, I once again nodded to him in greeting, and with a smile, he returned the favor. The next day, I went to take the dog for another walk after waking up, when I saw police cars and people everywhere. They were in front of the old man's house. What happened? Apparently, the old man who lived there had gone missing 2 days earlier, and the police were searching for him. He was found dead in one of the nearby mountains. He'd hung himself. Generally, you would go to the police station in order to confirm things, but this was the countryside where everyone knew each other, so the police drove his body to his wife first in order to have her confirm his identity. After a few minutes, a white car slowly pulled up before their house. I can't describe it well, but I could just see the 2 legs of his dead body poking out from underneath a green vinyl sheet from the back door. Later I found out that the old man was already dead the day he went missing, so who was the person I greeted? Even when I think about it now, it terrifies me. My parents' house was out in the middle of nowhere. There were few places for kids to play when summer holidays rolled around. We just collected insects, read manga at friends' houses, or went to play in the mountains or rivers. So there was a river I often went swimming in. The current there was slow, but it was still dangerous. Swimming was forbidden, but we ignored it and went swimming there anyway. Then, one day something happened. With nothing else to do, we went to play in the river. My friend, A, and I went fishing that day, while B and C went swimming in the upper stream. Close to where B and C were swimming was a concrete barrier, like a dam. There was a deep, huge hole underneath it, so it was often used as a diving spot. A and I fished for a while, but when we looked over at B and C, they were trying to climb the dam. "Ah, they're gonna dive in, huh?" I said to A as we watched them. B and C noticed and waved at us, so we waved back. B and C reached the top of the dam and dived in together. There were 2 large splashes, and A and I cheered them on. But when they came back up, their actions were strange. They rushed onto the bank and were screaming about something. Both of them were crying their eyes out. "What's wrong?" we asked them, but they kept screaming. "The hole! In the hole!" There was nothing we could do, so A and I jumped into the river, put on some goggles, and looked into the hole. It was dark, so we couldn't see very well, but we saw something that looked like a clump of seaweed. When we looked closer and realized what it was, I felt like I was going to pass out. It was a person. A person with their back to us was swaying in the water like they had grown out of the hole. What looked like seaweed was their hair. We quickly got out of the river and ran to tell some adults. According to what I heard later, the person had jumped off the dam and gotten their foot stuck under a rock in the hole, causing them to drown. It wasn't anyone we knew. But since then, jumping off the dam had been completely prohibited, and swimming in the river is even more off limits. The 4 of us never swam in the river again. There's this mountain in the village where my grandma lives, and in that mountain there's this amazingly beautiful emerald green pond. It's so green, it's almost blue. It feels like a transparent pastel color. Whatever you want to call it, it's really beautiful. However, the children of the village are told never to go near it. Whenever I asked why, the answer was always the same. Children don't need to know. Just don't go there. But kids will be kids, so, of course, I wanted to know more. I asked my grandma and adults from the village about the special features of the pond. If it was really that beautiful, I wanted to see it for myself. The other kids in the village felt the same, and whenever I went to visit, we'd start talking about going to see it. However, because the adults were warning so strongly against it, well, the rumor started amongst the kids that if you go to that pond, you'll never come back. I heard that it's bottomless, so if you fall in it, you'll die. People would say, so we never actually put our words into action. But when I entered junior high school and returned to the village, the kids I used to play with when I was a child, Taro, Jiro, and Hanako, Taro and Hanako were twins and Jiro was their cousin, were like, if you really can't return from there, then how come everyone knows what the pond looks like? If there really was a bottomless pond these days, they would fill it in. They started to say things that were more realistic, and I agreed. Is there really even a pond? It's not just some story they made up. So in the end, we decided, let's go check it out. The four of us met up early in the morning and made for the mountain. The mountain itself was small, so even if we got lost, we figured we'd be able to find our way up by nightfall. We didn't take the situation very seriously. Taro and Hanako and I were now junior high students, and Jiro was a second grader who did judo. He said if worse came to worse, and a bear or some wild dog attack, he would do some overhead throw and defeat them. It made us feel better, even though we knew it was impossible. While we were talking about these things, and tired after walking around for close to 3 hours, we found a strange place where the trees grew really densely. I can't explain it very well, but in just that spot, the trees were really numerous, like they had been forcibly planted there. There weren't even any animal trails. It's absolutely here. Look how spacious it is, Hanako said from the front of the line. She was a tomboy, and although we three boys were trembling, she went straight through a gap in the trees ahead of us. There was nothing we could do, so we followed her. Then, just as we thought, there was the pond. Center of the Earth? Whatever that movie is called. It was just like a scene out of that. In reality, it was clearer than I ever imagined. It was so beautiful, but thanks to the trees, it was kind of gloomy, and a small cabin beside the pond spoiled the view. At first, everyone was really excited, and we collected water from the pond in bottles that Hanako had prepared. But that little cabin continued to make us feel uneasy. Rather than calling it a little cabin, it was long, like a small hut that had been lengthened out. Just looking at it, it was dirty and creepy, like a mountain witch or something lived there. Then Jiro was like, if there's a mountain witch in there, I'm just gonna overhead throw her, and went inside. We went to follow him, but then out of nowhere Taro spit out, no way, I'm not going, I'll stay here. Hanako was sick of him acting like a weakling, but Taro stubbornly refused to concede. If you want to go, then just you and Jiro-chan can go. Ume-chan, myself, and I will just wait here, yeah? For some reason, I was the only one held back. I was scared, but I still wanted to go inside the cabin. But Taro was a scaredy cat too frightened to put his plans into action, and it would have been awful if something bad happened to him, so I decided to stay. I waved the two off as they entered the cabin, and sat by the green of the pond to talk with Taro. Why don't you want to go in there? You scared? I don't like it. It is scary. Well, then why is it okay for Hanako and Jiro-chan to go in? Taro replied, Hana-chan's always mean to me. I hate her. Jiro-chan always acts tough, but it's all just words, so I hate him too. So whatever if they die. I don't care. Hana-chan is always acting so big and mighty, and she treats me like dirt. Jiro-chan always hits me. I hate both of them. They should die. I just wish they'd die. That's why I came here, to have Magagami-sama kill them for me. Amongst his string of abuse, there was a word I had never heard before, so I repeated it. Magagami-sama? What's that? None of the village kids know about her. Hanako and Jiro don't know either because they're idiots. But I know. Magagami-sama lives here. Old Lady Kichizu told me about her because I'm smart. Yeah, but what is Magagami-sama? Ume-chan, you're kind to me, so I'll help you out. But I can't do anything for Hanako and Jiro. They're idiots. They act tough, they're stupid, they should die. Magagami-sama will kill them for me. It started to sound less like a string of abuse and more like a curse. At some point he stopped calling them by their nicknames as well. Taro kept going, spit flying from his mouth, and before long he let out a strange laugh. It was disturbing. He sat there holding his knees, and then his neck turned to look at me as he laughed. He'd gone crazy. Then I realized that Hanako and Jiro had been gone for a long time. I wanted to get away from Taro as well, so I headed towards the cabin. Stay there! Don't go looking for those two, Taro called out. It's already too late, he smiled. His face made me sick to my stomach, but I ignored him and went inside. It was pitch black and there was a strange smell. It smelled like something burning or something rotten. The further I went in, the sicker I became. Then I heard a strange laugh from the room at the end of the cabin. Reluctantly, I went in, and Hanako and Jiro were sitting on the floor. They were laughing the same way as Taro. It freaked me the heck out. I had to call someone at once. I turned around, and then right in front of me, a pair of white eyes were floating in the air. They were white, like white membrane covering the pupil of someone who'd gone blind. I let out a terrible scream and drew back towards the wall. As I did, I felt something sticky. I touched it again, and the entire wall was sticky. Gross, 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 gross. I wanted to get out immediately, but I couldn't move because of the white eyes. If I moved, they chased me. I was so terrified. The white eyes continued to stare at me. Am I going to be cursed and die, I thought? I didn't want to look at them anymore, so I turned my face to the right. When I did, I told you it was too late. Taro's face was hanging half inside the window, and Taro's eyes were exactly the same as the white eyes floating before me. Hoya, 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 hee 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 hee, hoya, hoya, hoya. Taro laughed. Hanako and Jiro also laughed, and the white eyes kept floating before me. I couldn't stand it anymore. Half crazed, I ran from the cabin and down the mountain. From behind me, I could constantly hear that hoya hoya sound. With tears and a runny nose flying everywhere, I fled. When I reached the bottom of the mountain, it was still midday. I thought it would have been night long ago. After descending the mountain and entering the village, the first person I saw was Taro and Hanako's grandfather. Ume! What's wrong? You! Their usually kind grandfather came running at me with incredible speed, flecks of spittle running from his mouth. You went there! You went there! With a perilous look on his face, he shook me, and I told him everything. We went up the mountain and saw the pond and cabin. I told him Taro's story, the white eyes and sticky wall, the three of them going crazy. They were still up there. I bit my tongue several times as I spoke. You need to save the three of them. What were those white eyes? Have I been cursed too? What is up there? I yelled. Their grandfather hugged me and said, It's all right. You're okay, Ume. You're okay. You were saved. You're okay. I was okay? What about Taro? Taro was his grandchild, not me. Why was he worried about him? I started to panic, but then I realized I didn't want to get the sticky stuff on their grandfather, so I pulled away from him. Then I saw what was on my own body. It looked a lot like mayonnaise, but it was spotted with black and red. It felt like the texture of mayonnaise too, plus it stank. The smell pierced my nostrils. In any case, my memories of the incident end around there. Next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor of my grandma's house surrounded by adults. My parents were crying their eyes out. They sat nearby but didn't try to talk to me. Everyone else did the same. Taro's parents were there too, but they were just silently crying while looking at me. Then I realized I couldn't move. I wasn't bound or anything, but for some reason my body wouldn't listen to me. I couldn't speak either. All I could do was open my eyes. What's this? I thought, starting to panic, when Taro's grandmother came over to speak to me. Umebon, take a look at my right eye, would you? Taro's grandmother lost her right eye in an accident long ago, so she had an artificial eye. I already knew that, so what good would looking at it do, but I did as she said and looked. What? It's the same as usual. The focus is a little strange, but it's your eye. Suddenly, I realized I could speak. The adults all let out a cheer. I'm so glad! He's been saved! They all cried and hugged each other. My parents hugged me as they cried, and even Taro's parents cried. We're so glad, Ume-chan, so glad! But I was just creeped out. Even though your own child has probably gone crazy, why are you happy and not saying angry things towards me, I thought. What about the other three? What happened to them? I asked. The adults just replied, What are you saying? They've been at home all morning, Ume-chan. If you learn anything from this, it's to not go up that mountain alone again. Ah, so that's what it was, huh? It had become, he went up the mountain alone. Taro and the others were probably locked away in their grandmother's storehouse or something because they'd gone mad. Understanding that, I said nothing. 2 or 3 days later, it was time to go back home with my parents. I never saw Taro or the other ones again, even amongst all the people who came to see us off. Taro and the others weren't there. My grandmother is still healthy, and even now as I'm in my 20s, I go to visit her with the change of the seasons. The village people are still kind, Taro's parents still act the same, and Taro and the others are still nowhere to be seen. When I asked about them, I heard that Hanako got married and moved to Tohoku. Taro and Jiro both started working at the same company, and then both moved overseas. When they were in high school, the three of them supposedly went to school in Tokyo. Whether that was true or not, ever since the incident, I never saw them again. I didn't know what the white eyes and sticky substance were, what Magagami-sama was, where Taro and the others were. The old lady Kichizu that Taro spoke of didn't exist in the village, and I still don't know who she was. In all the years since the incident, nothing has happened to me, and there haven't been any changes. I haven't seen the white eyes or sticky substance either since then. I asked my parents and the villagers about it further, but they just said, It was probably just a dream. You went up into the mountain alone and came down suffering from heat stroke. Pond? Don't know anything about that. First time I've heard of it. When I asked the kids who used to talk about rumors of the pond the same questions, they just calmly answered, I don't know anything about a pond. This happened to my 15-year-old brother when I was 18. It was past 12 a.m., and that day there had been some light rain. My brother's room was at the end of the second floor, about 10 meters away from the road. He was reading a book when suddenly he could hear something coming from the road outside. Dun. Dun. Thinking it might just be the rain on the roof, he didn't think too much of it. But as time went on, it felt like the sound was getting closer. So he opened the curtain and had a look outside. There was a small truck that seemed to be missing its trailer. It was driving really slowly, like the speed of a person walking. What was strange about it, though, was that none of the lights were on, and it was surrounded by a group of people. It seemed like that earlier noise was this truck. There were about 6 men and women around it, and they were all wearing some kind of cloth on their heads. After confirming that the truck had passed by, my brother came to my room and told me about it. When I heard, I was like, Why didn't you come and tell me sooner? And rushed to his room, but of course, the truck was gone. At the same time, I'd also heard the sound from my room. At first I thought it was just rain hitting the roof, but after a while, I thought it might have been the sound of a drum from far away. You can occasionally hear the sound of drums here during the night, and I was just thinking about how much of an annoyance it must be for people living nearby when my brother came in. We live in a small town in Hokkaido, by the way. Around 12 a.m. we only get 1, maybe 2 cars passing at night. I don't know what it was, but I guess It was some sort of strange religious group. Right around this season a few years back, I got a special train ticket for my 18th birthday, so I decided to go on a trip by myself. The platform was already completely dark when I got there. Guess I'll go stay at the Net Cafe on X Island today, hey? I got on the train heading towards X Island, but something seemed strange. It seemed like I'd gotten on the train heading in the opposite direction instead. I hurried and got off, but that just made things even worse. When I looked at the timetable, there were no more trains coming for the night. It was an unstaffed station surrounded by nothing but mountains and rice fields. It was right in the middle of a local area with very few streetlights. There was no station office, just a platform, so I worried about what to do. I thought for a bit while shooing away the bugs hanging around the streetlight. The bridge leading to the other platform was covered, so I decided to wait the night out up there. I stepped over the chain fencing off the stairs. For some reason it was blocked off, and went up. To be honest, it was the first time I'd ever slept outdoors. I'm worried. This empty station is scary. It's creepy. Just like Inagawa Junji would say. I was scared, but as soon as I sat back against the wall, I was overcome with exhaustion and slept soundly till morning. The sound of sparrows chirping woke me up. When I looked down at the ground around me in the morning light, I was startled. The area was covered in footprints. So many footprints, like I'd been surrounded. They looked like muddy footprints, although it could have been something else. The prints weren't those of a shoe, they were more like an animal. In a panic, I checked on my things, but it didn't appear that anything had been damaged. Just... I wonder what that really was, huh? This story happened to the younger brother of one of my mother's friends about 20 years ago. This younger brother started living alone in a rented house by the railway tracks of his hometown. It was a small, old, single-story house, and because there was just a fence separating it from the tracks, it was extremely cheap. There were few trains because it was the countryside, and hardly any passed during the night, so he wasn't very concerned about the noise. Then, one night, a few days after he moved in, he was woken by the sound of footsteps on the gravel outside. He thought about getting up to see whether it was a burglar, but the house was still locked securely, so he wasn't worried. He was tired from the day's work, and so he went back to sleep. A few nights later, he heard the same sound again. He was just going to ignore it again, but then he realized something strange. It was more like the sound of someone crawling against the gravel rather than walking on it. Feeling something strange was up, he peeked through the curtain in the direction of the sound. A few meters away, there was a man missing the lower half of his body, crawling across the gravel. He was going around and around on the same spot. The younger brother let out a scream of surprise, and the creature turned in his direction. Panic, he closed the curtain and hid in bed, and before he knew it, the sound outside had stopped. Zusha. The sound was coming from inside his room. He timidly peeked out from underneath his futon in the direction of the sound. It was right there. It was the upper torso of an old man grinning as he crawled towards him. Terrified, he could do nothing but tremble inside his futon as he waited. When morning arrived, the sound disappeared. Every now and then, the old man would appear again, but as he did little other than crawl around, the younger brother continued to live there for another 2 years. Apparently, there was an old man who suffered from dementia that lived nearby. He was hit by a train and killed. I went there myself a few years ago. The house is still there, although no one lives in it now. So, it's falling apart. Asan liked bird watching, so he got in his car and went to the nearby mountains like he often did. He was observing the birds in the early morning forest when, for a brief moment, he spotted something unfamiliar in his binoculars. He looked over with his naked eye, but perhaps because of the distance he couldn't really see anything. Asan looked through the binoculars once more and shuddered. On the other side of the lens, he could see a strange figure, what appeared to be a clump of moss on human legs, stumbling around clumsily. The upper body was as though its head and arms had been shaved off, its legs pale in color, and it was covered in mud. Having gazed upon something he shouldn't have, Aeson shivered. But then he noticed something that made him run, and never return to the mountain again. That strange thing in the distance was walking slowly with an unsteady gait, but without a doubt, it was heading right for him. This is a story about when I nearly ran into a ghost. It happened when I was a university student, just before the summer holidays. I found a part-time job at a holiday resort with a few of my classmates. Even though it was called a resort job, it was at a now-declining summer resort, cleaning a holiday house. For 2 nights and 3 days, food and accommodations were included. 5 of us from our class, 3 guys and 2 girls, decided to go. The manager of the resort met us when we arrived at the closest station, and took us there by car. Although it was old, it was a rather large Western-style resort with a garden and a pool. It was a really nice place, but while we were all carrying on like, wow, only one person, Aeson alone, was quiet. She was, in general, a quiet person, but on the way she had been having fun like the rest of us. I wondered what was wrong when, suddenly, Aeson's phone rang. She answered it. After finishing her conversation, she turned to all of us. "I'm sorry, that was our professor. He wants us all to return right away. There's an academic meeting soon, so it's become a little inconvenient. I'm sorry we came all this way. We'd like to cancel the part-time job." The old man faltered at her sudden words. "I need someone to work today. Do you have any friends who could come instead?" "Sorry, I think that would be difficult as well," Aeson asserted decisively. I was about to ask just what was going on when beside her, B went, "Oh, yeah, the professor asked us to do some work. The deadline is tomorrow, so we have to get back. I'm sorry, terribly sorry. We'll be going back now. We'll walk to the station, so there's no need for you to escort us back." Aeson grabbed the other girl's hand and pulled her along as she started walking. "Well, if you'll excuse us, we'll be going now." At B's prompting, I also bowed and left. I took a quick look back, and the old guy was just standing there, looking at the holiday house. "Hey, what did the professor say?" I asked Aeson as we walked back to the station. "I'll tell you once we're on the train," she said without revealing anything. B also silently nodded his head. We got on the train, and after we passed about 2 stops, Aeson finally told us. I'm sorry. The professor didn't really call. I lied. Just, that holiday house was scary. I thought we shouldn't stay there." "What the hell?" I said. Then B muttered absent-mindedly. "You guys didn't see it, huh? It was at the bottom of the pool, right? There were jars and mannequin arms all over the place weighing something down." "Huh?" Aeson let out a puzzled voice. "Aeson, isn't that why you refused to go?" "No, I refused because there was a woman with a sickle standing near the window." According to Aeson, the window was fixed with shimenawa, rope used to ward against evil. The woman inside had white eyes and, with all her might, was trying to cut the rope with her sickle. As soon as we heard that, we all agreed that it was for the best that we didn't stay there. When I was a child, my parents worked the night shift. I was lonely, so I had trouble getting to sleep. Just as I was about to fall asleep, the edge of the shoji door would always open, and there would be a small shadow looking at me. But rather than being afraid of it, I wanted to be its friend. Day by day, the small shadow got closer and closer, and before I knew it, it was right by my pillow. I always fell asleep before it got close to me. I couldn't see its face in the darkness, but I knew it was a boy around the same age as me, 4 or 5 years old. At first, we never spoke and kind of just played, but then we started to chat as well. Perhaps we had an unspoken agreement, but I never told my parents. I thought that if I told them I was playing and not sleeping, I'd get into trouble. And for some reason, I was able to see in the dark, so we were able to play with toys, play tag, and so on. When I started elementary school, I made lots of friends. Perhaps because we played so much at lunchtime, I was better able to sleep at night, so I stopped seeing the shadow. Even though I played with my new friends, I was also concerned about my nighttime friend. So one day I got into my futon and waited for him to appear. For the first time in a while, I heard the soot sound of the shoji door screen opening again. He was smiling, I could tell in the dark, and had come to play. I was so excited to see him again after such a long time, and while running around the room, my arm got caught on the light string and I accidentally pulled it. Underneath the light, I saw him for the first time. He was a child, but looked like an old man. His skin was wrinkled and he barely had any hair, and what was there was white. It was the first time I'd seen a person like that before. He seemed embarrassed and uneasy and hid behind the shoji screen. I ran into the hallway to chase him, but he was running towards the entrance with a really tall woman. As he turned the corner, he waved, "Bye," and then he was gone. I remember feeling incredibly sad. His mother had come to pick him up. I was all alone again. My mother never slept with me, even though I was just a kid. I was kind of jealous. I waited for him the next night, but he never came again. I got used to the sad nights without him, and in time, I was able to sleep better again. One day at school, I lost a game, and as punishment, I had to reveal a secret. I didn't have anything particular good to reveal, so I decided to tell them about the late nights I spent playing with that boy. "No way, you're lying," everyone said to me coldly. I didn't know why they wouldn't believe me. They're just jealous. That's why they're saying those things, I thought. In actuality, I thought these events had been a totally normal thing. They asked me what his name was, where he lived, and so on, and I realized I didn't know anything about him. I couldn't answer, so they branded me a liar, even though it was true. I was upset. I wanted to see him again and ask him all sorts of questions and have to believe in his existence, but he never appeared again. I prayed and hoped, but he never came. For a while I was branded a liar, and the other kids treated me like I was a freak. I was cut off from my classmates, but even so, I was later able to enjoy my high school life, and then university. Eventually I became a working adult and started drinking more and more. One day I suddenly got a really bad headache, and I was lying in bed when I saw this old sweets box. I remembered it from somewhere. I forgot about getting medicine, and following my memories, I looked through the box. I pulled it out of the TV stand, and when I opened it, it was full of old black and white photos. Forgetting my headache for the time being, I looked through them. He was there. There was a photo of him in the arms of his mother, the woman who came to pick him up that time. For the first time, I realized that he wasn't a real person. For a long time, I innocently believed he was. I asked my parents about it, and they said he was a relative. He died from a terrible illness, and he once lived on the land that my current house stood on. Even though playing with him as a child had been so fun, the moment I realized the truth, it was terrifying. In the end, I went to visit his grave and give him my thanks for everything he'd done.